This morning is going to look a little bit different, and I wanted to give you just a little bit of history on this, just to kind of show and set the stage for how God works when we're not expecting him to. A couple of months ago, we were in a Board of Servant Leaders meeting, and Rob McCammon brought up an idea for us as far as one of our local missions giving partners that we do every quarter, where we take a percentage of the tithe that is received, and we give that to a local organization that we believe is doing God's work, whether they profess to be a God-following company or not, or organization or not. We give towards them to help out in the work that God is doing. And so Rob McCammon brought up an idea of addiction solutions several months ago. And then for the next couple months, because it wasn't really time to make that decision, we kind of just let it simmer until about a month and a half ago when I reached out to Rob and I said, hey, you brought this up. Tell me a little bit more. We texted back and forth with a few questions here and there. And Rob reached out to Steve McCammon and just, pitching this idea of, would you be able to come on Sunday morning? I don't know how much details, Rob, you actually gave to Steve at the time of that, but very little. All right, that sounds about right, yeah. So Steve, though, responded with this is the version I received from Rob. So if this isn't completely accurate, you'll have a second here in just a moment to correct everything Rob told me. But Steve said, let him know that he actually would love to share his testimony if we would have a spot for that. And at that point, on that Sunday, this sounds bad, I understand that, but please bear with me here. It wasn't the Sunday to have him come in and share a testimony, but I pitched a different Sunday to him at the end of fall break because I knew I was going to be on vacation for fall break, and sometimes it's nice to be able to come back and not, as I'm gone, be preparing a message and everything because, I'm not able to fully give myself to vacation at that point. Fast forward to where we are right now. And I've come back from vacation. I had a wedding that I officiated yesterday, which was super exciting, with Will and Kaylee, now Scott, getting married yesterday. And this afternoon, we're going to celebrate the life of Dale Wilson. And so preparing those two things and not having a message in between was a huge blessing to me, meaning God had something figured out ahead of time, I believe, that he knew that this is going to be one of those weeks where it's a good week to have somebody else share. On top of that, and I won't share with you the whole conversation that we had, but Steve was sharing with me just the perfect timing of that message that he received from Rob as far as some things that were going on around in his life and with Addiction Solutions, to receive that text saying, hey, would you be willing to come and share your testimony, was perfect timing. Meaning God had a plan in place there. So this morning, I'm not going to get up and I'm not going to speak in the traditional sense, but we've invited Steve McCammon, from Addiction Solutions to come and share with us this morning. So would you welcome Steve as he comes up and joins us this morning?
Got it? I've tried it both ways.
There you go.
There we got it. Jesus. Well, I'll just start off by saying this is not exactly my strong suit. I'm very nervous. I don't enjoy getting up and speaking in front of people. I've got a checklist I need to go over. My wife's terrified when I get up in front of people and speak because I'm usually going to make a butt out of myself or embarrass her, one of the two. Make sure my phone's off. That's important if you don't know, because at the church I go to, there are actually people that right about now will start calling your number to make sure you turn your ringer off. I know this to be true because I happen to be one of those people. Anyway, my name's Steve McCammon. I'm here to speak on you on behalf of Addiction Solutions. We run a sober living facility over in Vincennes. We have 3 houses. They're on the corners of Hart and 2nd Street. 1 house in Princeton, a house in Albany, and we're just in the process of buying another house in Princeton. We run it runs 9 months to 1 year. What was that? Gosh, I'm having enough trouble back here, Dan. Keep your thumb on that button, too, to censor me, if you would, please. Run a 9 to 12-month program for recovering alcoholics and addicts. Lots of rehabs run a 30-day program, and honestly, they don't work. You can dry somebody out and get them off of that in 30 days. And then 99 times out of 100, within a few weeks, they're right back into the same rut they was in. Run I don't really know how to describe this. We call it a faith-based 12-step program. You mention 12 steps around a lot of churches, and people immediately bristle up. If any of you have ever read the 12 steps, there's this thing they say, choose the God of your understanding. And that gets people in church on the defensive. You know, you're allowed to pick any God. No, that's not how it works. You got to understand, like I lead a Bible study in Vincennes on Wednesday nights, and we'll have 18, 20, sometimes 30 people there. And out of them 30 people, you're going to have 5, maybe 10 that were brought up in the church, have some sort of a church background. Another 8 or 10 that kind of believe there's some sort of a God, but not real sure what that God is. And you're going to have a handful of pure atheists, doesn't believe there's anything to God at all. So through the 12 steps and the choosing the God of your understanding, if we can get them to at least start with a tiny concept that there is a God, there is something greater than yourself, and it's not you. That's a start. Then you can kind of start building on that. So there's been this popular thing of like you got these 12 steps and you got the church, and by golly, I ought to just be able to put my faith in God and God's going to heal me. I'll get to that later. It doesn't always work like that. Sometimes God shows us a way to do it and expects us to do a little bit of it ourselves. So what you end up with, instead of the 12 steps and the church going like this, we try and put them like this, where they can work together. For the recovering addict or alcoholic, it's going to take everything they can and probably still going to fail. I hate to be pessimistic, but statistically, very, very few succeed. I would almost venture to say there's not a person sitting in this room that doesn't know someone that's struggling with either alcohol or drug addiction. Am I right? Show of hands. I'd say almost everybody does. Something you probably don't realize is I bet almost all of you know somebody fairly well that's a struggling alcoholic or an addict, and you have no idea about it. Might be a coworker, somebody you work with every day, maybe it's a family member that's fighting that battle, struggling with it, and you have no idea. You're very close to him, possibly. That happens a lot more often than you realize. Sorry? I thought somebody said something. I'd like to share, when I get down here this morning, have you look at a couple of passages in the Bible that maybe you'll look at a little bit different. Matthew chapter 6. Geez, oh, Pete, sorry, I apologize, but this isn't easy for me, so. Matthew 6:25 says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap nor store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Sure, most of you have read that passage many times. I think it has to do with worry, right? I'll just come back to that later because there's something else in there that I think we miss a lot of times. Best way I can shed light on this, maybe share some of my personal testimony. I was raised maybe like a lot of you in the traditional Christian church, Sullivan, Indiana. Drug to church every Sunday. Didn't particularly want to go, but that's just what we done. I think as a little kid growing up in that church, they sung them old-time songs that I hope I don't step on any toes here. They were depressing, to say the least. That's all I can say. They sung all 6 verses of them songs, or was there 5? They sung all 5 verses, okay. Do you know why they sung all 5 verses? Because there weren't 6. So anyway, didn't like it, rebelled like a lot of kids done, said, as soon as I got old enough on my own, I'm never going to go to that place again. I just didn't sit well with me. Funny thing was, about high school, I met this gal. She was my girlfriend, later my wife. We got married right out of high school. And her family was one of them church-going people. By the way, what's the word for it? They call it acapella, there we go. And I thought acapella was a beach in Mexico or something, But they went to church every Sunday, and I was like, okay, I'm good with that. Then they went Sunday nights too. And then he's expected to go on Wednesdays. And I was like, wait just a minute. I believe in God, I'm okay with that, but we're getting a little bit carried away with this Jesus stuff, So it didn't help any that they also frowned on the fact that I'd show up to a softball game Saturday afternoon with a cooler full of beer in my truck. I thought that was perfectly normal behavior. So her family and me didn't get along, and I just thought that was way too much church, so we quickly divorced, and that let me free to pursue a life of doing what I darn well please, which basically meant partying, drinking, running around. Shortly after that, I met another gal. We quickly moved in together, was engaged and all that, and lived together for about 2.5 years. When we broke up and she split up, that woman kind of had the nerve to tell me that she thought I had a drinking problem. I was 22 years old, for crying out loud. You don't have a drinking problem at 22 years old. You just like to party, for crying out loud. But I was devastated, so I went and tried this program they call Alcoholics Anonymous. 23 years old, walked in an AA meeting. Of course, I had to drive to Vincennes because I live in Sullivan, and you sure as heck weren't going to go to a meeting in your hometown, for crying out loud. Somebody might know you. I think it's called pride, maybe. Attended that for a while, and it worked, but if anybody knows anything about what's the definition of an alcoholic? Someone tell me? My definition was you slept in a box in the alley, you slept on the cardboard bench, brown paper bag, all that. That didn't fit me, so. I dropped out of that, went on back to kind of the same, fast forward a few more years, met my wife Annette. We was married. Started a period of about 8 or 10 years of hiding it. I guess that's what you call controlled drinking. Does anybody know what controlled drinking means? That's when you work real hard at trying to keep everybody from knowing it. I quickly became that person I was talking about earlier. That nobody knew. The person sitting in church next to you didn't have any idea that you was fighting an inner battle. So one time I was going on a fishing trip up north with a couple of guys from church, and I got to describing to him what my battles and my fights or struggles. And he tells me this story about a flood coming to town, and there's a guy sitting on the porch, and police come up. And I said, hey, there's a flood coming, you need to leave, we're going to evacuate you. And the guy said, no, I've prayed to God, God's got this. Later that day, the floodwaters was coming up on the porch. 2 firemen come by in a boat, wanted to rescue this fella. He said, no, I've prayed to God, God's got this. Later that day, the guy sitting on the roof of the house, helicopter comes by to rescue this man. Have you all heard this story? I'm sure some of you have. Come on, get in, we're going to rescue you before you drown. And the guy says, no, I've prayed, God's going to save me. Well, the guy drowns, he meets St. Peter at the gate, and he says, God, I put all my faith in you. What's the deal? I prayed to you. And God says, well, I sent 2 policemen, 2 firemen, and a helicopter. What more do you want? God tells me the story. I'm like, okay, where are you going with this? I don't get it. He said, well, you've told me over and over that how you've struggled with this. You've been to the altar, you've prayed, you've given this to God. Relieve me of this, Lord. You go right back to the scene. He said, you told me 10 years ago when you went to AA, it worked. Yeah, what's your point? You're still missing. He said, maybe God's showing you that there is a way you can do this. Maybe it ain't that lightning bolt of miracle that I was looking for in my life. I thought, you come up here, you bow down, you give it all to God. Well, wait a minute. You give it God the parts of it you want. I think that was where I was having trouble. I wasn't willing to give it all to him, but I give him most of it and still wanting this miracle. And God was showing me, no, here's what you got to do. So anyway, I went back to AA with a little bit different attitude that time. Seemed to start working. Got probably a year without drinking him. And me and a bunch of guys, I don't know if you ever hear Shaker Prairie Christian Church. It's over there in the Oaktown. That's where I attended. Me and a bunch of them guys decided to go down to Arkansas on a fishing trip. We pulled in down there to Arkansas, I was unpacking. Liquor store right across the road. Imagine that. One of the guys, these are all church guys that get me. I think there was 8 of us went. One said, boy, cold beer would be good. Eight guys. One of them said, well, why don't we go buy somebody will go get a case of beer. And I'm listening. Better get 2. Thought, I can do the math real quick. And I thought 8 guys, a case of beer. I done, this ain't going to work. Better get. My point, I'm not throwing any of those guys under the bus, but not a single one of them had any idea the struggle and the fight that I'd been fighting for 10, 15 years at that point in time. But perfectly okay. I don't really know how to say this without being. So I'm not condemning them, or it's fine for them, but I don't know, buddies, do you know what this man right here struggles with? I don't know that. I'm not picking on you. That's my point. A lot of us don't know, and some inadvertently, we have the best intentions. It's quite okay for you to have a cold beer. I'm not. But what if he's struggling with it? You see what I mean? What that did, started drinking again, and that was really then back to hiding it because my wife knew it. She knew I'd been in AA. Then you got to work really, really hard. It becomes an inner battle all the time. This went on for probably I'm going to say 1999 till 2015. I don't know how many times I've been up there, still wanting God to cure me of this, still waiting, listening for God. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying God wasn't doing his part. I wasn't willing to do mine. Don't get me wrong, I'm not. Kept getting worse. That inner battle like that causes a lot of anger, a lot of teeth-gritting, stinking resentments. I had a lot of hatred. I didn't think I did. I had a lot of resentments. I'm a farmer by trade. One of the things I didn't realize, several other, right in the middle of a big farming community, and I had some resentments towards neighbors. Boy, I don't want to go there, but I was going to go there anyway. A guy walk across this aisle on Sunday morning and say, boy, Steve, I'm glad to see you. Nice of you. Good to see you here. When he was talking to my landlords the night before, trying to steal land, I know that maybe that don't go on in this community. It does where I come from. Caused me to be bitter and mean and angry. Apologize if I'm stepping on any toes or anything, but that's just how I was. I was mad. The only way I could quiet that down, I knew how to quiet that down. Nothing a 12-pack of Budweiser won't take care of. But I didn't realize over that period of 10 years what a mean son of a bucket was turning me into, and angry. Not mean, angry. Till finally, I don't know, 2014, I think it was, that all come to a head. My wife had had enough. We started the proceedings of divorce. By this time, we had 2 kids. They were teenagers. We'd been married 25 years. My marriage was over. My mind was had it. It's the end of my rope. Finally, for some stinking reason, poor choice of words, sorry. 2 or 3 of the geezers in our church meet on Wednesday morning for prayer. I decided to go down there on Wednesday and talk to them. Geezers, is that okay? Okay. So me and my wife, this was Saturday, Wednesday morning, I decided to go down there and meet with those guys. And I pretty well, for the first time, I believe, I let it all out. I told them what was going on, and I realized that somehow or another I had to forgive some people, because what they did, that's on them. But how I handled it wasn't right. That was just as wrong. I had to forgive people. That ain't always easy. I mean, I'll forgive you if you're going to come to me and apologize. Tell you, yeah, I was wrong. Forgiveness don't work like that. I got to forgive them. That's what you do if that's up to you. Funny thing was, I left Mariah Creek Christian Church, headed up the highway to Carlisle, back to the farm, whipped into Carlisle Plaza. And before I left there, this lady walked across the parking lot and said, "Hey, Steve, I need to talk to you, man." Okay, what's that? Before I left the plaza, she said, "Hey, my current tenant's retiring. We'd like to rent you our farm." I hadn't been able to grow or add anything in probably 15, 20 years. This wasn't 10 minutes after or 15 minutes later. I thought, wow, God, I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. No, I didn't say that. I sat there in the truck and bawled. Went home and told my wife what had just happened. And she told me something still. She said, maybe if we get third-party counseling, maybe we try and save our marriage. Because I thought it was over. She thought it was over. Our pastor, Matt Hoffman, if any of you have ever heard or know him, he's kind of a hillbilly redneck sort. He don't have zip ties on his Bible like I do. He's not a complete redneck, but he's close. He suggested I go on this here thing called an Emmaus walk. I'd heard of it. It was one of them, I don't know, I had envisioned they were going to leach you a little secret handshake. And I had pictured like a bunch of guys like I know Don and Troy, so I'll pick them, a bunch of us guys sitting around a campfire in loincloth singing Kumbaya. I'd been asked to go before, and like I didn't want no part of that. They were probably going to rattlesnakes out or something. But to put it no other way, it was told if I wanted to save our marriage, that's what I was going to do. So I went to the Emmaus walk. I still got the splinters under my fingernails where they drug me off the front porch, kicking and screaming, but I went. Sorry, my mouth keeps getting dry. So at the walk, it went pretty good. I had several of those. I remember going to the altar that night and saying, Lord, I can't give anything to you. I don't know. I'm missing something. Show me. Because no matter what I've done, I said, I'm like one of them fair pegs. You can clean me all up nice and pretty and shiny, and I look real good, and you turn your back on me, what's I going to do? I'm going to go back and wallow in the mud. I'm a pig. That's what I do. So I said, Lord, show me what I'm missing, please. Went back to my seat. You know, I don't know. I did one of these numbers. I sat there and okay, we're good. Anybody ever be like that? Ask God for something. Give him, I don't know, somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes to answer. Pastor Matt Hoffman walked over. He happened to be working that walk. He walked over and sat down beside me. The chapel was pretty well thinning out about that time. And we talked. He said, you doing okay? And I said, yeah, Matt, I think I went forward and pretty well give it to God. We looked across the room, and there was a guy clear over there in the corner by himself, sitting there with his head down. You could tell, kind of crying. You could tell he was, I said, that poor sap over there's having a tough go of it, ain't he? Being honest, pastor says, yeah, and God's telling me one of us needs to go pray with that guy. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty obvious. I said, I told him, I said, ain't that what they pay you for? And I was dead serious. I'm here screwed up. I mean, like strung out like a research monkey, for crying out loud. And you're telling me somebody needs to go pray. You're the preacher. Anyway, side note here, don't argue with a pastor in the chapel. They got this thing called home court advantage. Very reluctantly, I thought, oh, shucks. Walked over there, across the room, thought, well, okay, I'm going to pat this guy, ask him if he'd like somebody to pray with him. He's going to say, no, I'm good. I'm going to walk back over here. He's happy. I'm happy. The pastor's happy. Unfortunately, he said, yeah, please. I thought, boy, now I'm in over my head because I got no idea. I'm lucky to pray for myself. You're on your own, dude. I muddled out some sort of a butchered up prayer. I've told people before it probably sounded like the school teacher on Charlie Brown. It was a whoop, 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 amen, thank you. Now I'm out of here. Done my part. I got about 4 or 5 steps away from that feller. I don't know. People call it a God moment, a vision. I don't know what it was. I turned around, walked back over to that feller, and I said, dude, I don't know what's ailing you or what your trouble is. Ain't none of my business. But I said, it took me 25 years to get crawled out of a bottle long enough to even be here. I don't belong here with these Christians. And I won't repeat the words I said, I'm a piece of... He started bawling. He said, I had my last drink Wednesday, and I'm really struggling. Of all the people in that room, I probably felt his pain more than anybody else. Went on to sponsor him in the program. I think that was the first time in my life outside of the safety confines of an AA meeting. I could say that there because it was safe, you know. But I'd never been able to stand in front of anybody and say, I'm an alcoholic. I didn't realize it was that pride. That's why I drove from Sullivan 30 miles to Vincennes, for crying out loud, so nobody'd see. I finally began to swallow the pride. I believe God showed me when I said, show me. You got to start helping somebody else. Quit worrying about yourself. I'll take care of you, but you got to help somebody else. I don't know, there's a miracle that night in my life. Maybe you don't call that a miracle, it was. Went back home to church, started attending with a different attitude. It seemed like within weeks, all of a sudden I noticed a young man sitting here had the Bible in it. Have you ever seen it? Some of the Bibles say Recovery Bible. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not. I noticed stuff like that, and I went and talked to him. Sorry from the bottom. One by one, there was opportunities just boom, boom, boom. God was putting in front of me to help other addicts. 6 months probably went by before it dawned on me that I haven't had an urge. It hasn't before, you know. Go on a fishing trip with the guys from church, yeah, they might be drinking, I'd sure like to have a beer. Wasn't like that no more. That urge was gone. Double gut gone, you know. Funny thing was, in fall, the walk was in March, just leading up to fall. I have a bunch of buddies from Minnesota come down every year during deer season. We stay at the cabin. It was always more of a party. We pretended to deer hunt, but it was... I called them guys and canceled. I thought, well, God, if I got to give up those things, I guess I'm willing to give them up. About a week before hunting season, God gave me another one of them lightning bolt vision things. I wish you knew what that was, because I don't hear his voice. I wish it was like the burning bush where God actually talks to you. I don't know about you guys, but God needs to use color crayons with me. Draw it out in real plain, because I don't always hear real good what he's trying to say. He said, sometimes you're supposed to be a light in the world. I didn't quite understand it, but I called my friends from Minnesota. I said, come down, deer hunting. I don't know how much time I got. I'm trying to hurry. I won't wrap this up. Long story short, they came down, hunted for 2 or 3 days. One of them one morning asked me what was different. And I just told him, I said, I'm an alcoholic, I can't drink. He said, I noticed Wednesday night when we got here, something was different. And me and him was sitting in the pickup getting ready to go to the woods that morning. And he started crying. He said, you wouldn't believe that. He said, I've been struggling with this for years. He said, we leave Minnesota, we come down here. He said, I'm away from home, you guys are all partying, blah, blah, blah. He said, I give in and start drinking again. I was back to being that enabler for the guy, you know. God shows us different ways. If we're willing, He'll put things in our life and opportunities, but we got to be willing to act on them. Am I doing something wrong? Gosh, where was I at? I'm sorry. Went on the walk, then that incident at deer camp happened. Long about this time, started helping a young guy in our church, taking him to Vincennes to NA meetings. And he got to tell me about a Bible study down there that was for addicts, and I got to go into that and got to go attend a place called the Courage House. It was a sober living facility. I met a guy called Todd Colehouse. He was the person that founded Addiction Solutions, got it up and going. One night, first or second night I was at that Bible study, this guy named Todd, and I didn't know him at the time. He starts telling a story. He said, a few years ago, wait a second, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, I apologize. Organization's not my... Could you put up on the screen there, Matthew 13, starting at verse 3. Chapter 13. It says, a farmer went out to sow his seed. He was scattering the seed. Some fell along the path. The birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell along the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what is sown. I don't know about you guys, but when I'd always read that passage, I'd try and figure out, where am I? Where do I fit in? Am I the good seed? I mean, did I fall on the good soil? Am I growing? Am I the poor soil where I'm letting the thorns of life and all that choke, the stickers and all? But I try and think of the soil. Which soil am I? I need to be the good soil. Well, I see a lot of farmers. I think there's a lot of farmers in here and people with ag background. Most of us in ag, it's our job, isn't it, to evaluate the soil. You look at a field, Don, you get outside, is that good? Is it ready to plant? If it's not ready to plant, you don't plant, right? Or if it's crummy dirt, you're not. How about this? What if it's really crummy dirt? Are you going to waste your time planting there? You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. Yeah. This Bible study that night, I was talking about Todd Colehouse. He starts telling a story about a friend of mine. He says, this buddy of mine was sitting in the garage a couple years ago. This is back 8, 9 years ago now. He said, we were sitting out in the garage, smoking meth, drinking beer. He says, my friend holds a beer can out. He said, how do we stop this madness? Todd said, beats me. Well, fast forward a year or two. Todd got in the program, got clean, got sober, started Addiction Solutions. He's telling this story, and he said, but my buddy jumped off a houseboat in Kentucky Lake last week, had a heart attack, and drowned. That went through me like a knife. Back 2015, I believe it was. Had a friend who was a mechanic. He come to my farm, worked on tractors, helped us diesel. He's a diesel mechanic, construction mechanic. And for the last couple of years, he'd show up at the farm. Steve, want a beer? We used to drink a lot together. And I'd say, no, I got something me and my wife's got to do, or I'd make up some lame excuse. Every time Dave showed up, he had a cooler full of beer. This went on for a couple of years. I can think of more than one instance when he'd offer me a beer, and I'd always make up some sort of a lame excuse as why I didn't want one. Well, unfortunately, my buddy Dave, the mechanic, jumped off a houseboat, Kentucky Lake, in 2015, had a heart attack and drowned. We were putting this together. It's not rocket science here. Never occurred to me, never in my wildest dreams the last few years, that Dave had sat in the garage asking a friend of his holding a beer can out saying, how do I stop this madness? How do I stop this madness? And here I am, got 3 years sober, still one beer. Did I ever say, no, Dave, I'm an alcoholic? No, Dave, God help me with this. God relieve me of this obsession. Never once did that even cross my mind. Of saying, I can help you, brother. No, let pride say, no, me and my wife's got something, I better not. Bull. I said then and there, if that means getting up in front of people, shaking like a coon dog, never mind, I ain't going there either, but if that's what God's telling me I got to do it, because I don't ever want that feeling again of saying, somebody died not knowing the Lord, and I didn't do squat to help them out because I was too stinking prideful. See, if you read that passage I just read, you might wonder what that has to do with this. The farmer went out to sow his seed. What's the farmer's role in this? Come on. Sow the seed. Does it say the farmer went out and evaluated, was that seed ready to sow here? Was that seed ready to sow there? It says the farmer sowed the seed. It ain't up to that farmer how it went. He sows the seed. It's up to God. I don't know about y'all, but there's more than once in my life I said, boy, I need to share the Lord with this fella. He ain't ready yet. I don't think he's in the right mindset right now to receive that. Any of you ever been there? Am I the only heathen in here? I bet not. I really ought to take notes. It'd be a little easier for me to keep track of where I was at. Hope that was your phone, not mine. Is that my cue? I'm out of time? Okay. I asked you a while ago, verse 13, or chapter 6, verse 25, it's kind of become a personal favorite of mine. You look at the birds of the air, they do not sow, reap, nor store away in barns, let your heavenly Father feeds them. What's the bird's role in this? You're reading that right now. You tell me, what's the bird's role in this?
Bird just lives.
You think? So the bird's just supposed to sit there in the nest with his mouth open, waiting on God to drop worms out of heaven into his mouth? No. Like me going to AA meetings and things like that, lots of times God's going to take care of me. He says, don't worry. God's going to take care of me just like the bird, but I got to get out of the nest. God's going to provide worms all over the place for that bird, but it's up to the bird whether or not he chooses to get out of the nest and go find the worm or sit on his butt and not do nothing, waiting on somebody else to do it for him. Sometimes we got to get out of the nest and do our part. Thank you all for the opportunity to let me share this morning.
In Matthew 6:24, which is actually right before where you picked up, we see Jesus telling us words where he says that no one can serve two masters. Either you will love the one and hate the other, or you will hate the one and love the other. Now, he's talking about, in particular, money at that point, but the truth is you can put anything in there other than money, too. We cannot serve two masters, and that's what addiction comes down to, is we're choosing one master over another master. I don't have, and never have had, a problem with drugs and alcohol, but I have addiction. And I know that I'm not the only one in this room that struggles with different addictions. In the church, we like to celebrate some of our addictions. We don't want to talk about them. We, full confession, very much addicted to coffee and caffeine, but we like to celebrate that one. but it can quickly become something that is much more and much worse. I know that there are a lot of us sitting here in this room this morning who suffer from some, so it may be exactly the type that Steve shared with us this morning. And maybe God's calling you to use your story to share with other people how they can fight addiction. Maybe at this point, God's just calling you to admit that you have it. Actually, I spent some time looking up the actual definitions of some of these things, but a drug is simply actually, I want to make sure I get this right. I can remember the physiological word in here, because then I went and looked that one up to make sure that I was going to explain it correctly. But a drug is simply a substance which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body, aka drugs, alcohol, or caffeine. Physiological, when I look that up, is relating to the branch of biology, I know there's a big words, that deals with the normal functions of the living organisms and their parts. Meaning a drug is simply something that alters our state of mind or our state of being. It can be the big things that we often think about, or it can be a device that many of us carry in our pocket. It can be something else that we ingest, something else that we can't defeat, something else that we are allowing to be our master, even when we don't want it to be. And so this morning, without me continuing to talk, Steve offered to pray over anyone who is struggling with an addiction of some kind. He didn't know that I was going to do this part, and so that's actually another one of those things where God has people working together. I'm going to invite you this morning to do something bold for some of you. Again, me being the first one to confess that I fight with addictions. They're not the ones that we typically think of and, things like that, but I have mine. And I'm going to invite you, if you are here this morning and you are saying, I have been trying to defeat an addiction in my life, and I just can't do it, and I want to give that to God, I'm going to invite you to stand at this moment. To not do the controlled addiction where we hide it from everybody. And again, people are going to stand around you and they're not going to know what it is. It might be something that they would look at you and be like, oh, so you have too many coffees in a day. That's no big deal. But you're sitting there going, God has been telling me that I need to hand this over to him, and I've been resisting. Or I didn't even realize it was an issue until this morning, and God has spoken to me and said, this is something that you need to hand over to me. It can be control, it can be power, it can be so many different things. I'm going to invite you to stand as we sing this final song. I'm going to invite you to bring it to the altar. I know that the altars are something that, that was a previous generation, and sometimes I think maybe that's to our own detriment. That we're unwilling to take that step forward and to lay it down before him. I'll be here to pray with you. Steve will be here to pray with you. Others around you may see you and say, hey, I want to pray with you too. You don't have to give details. You don't have to share what it is. But if you're sitting here this morning and you know that God is telling you, I need you to hand this over to me so that we can defeat this together, I invite you, don't miss this moment this morning.